Firstly, it's my great pleasure to introduce and welcome Mike Barry to ZC3. As Director of Sustainable Business for Marks & Spencer for almost 2 decades, Mike has over the last half-decade taken this experience of aligning and integrating sustainability into the business agenda within other organisations. I'm delighted, therefore, that Mike is joining ZC3 today to share his insights, his knowledge, and offer practical lessons for taking sustainability action to build better businesses that engage colleagues, suppliers, and customers. Mike, welcome.
Great, thank you very much. And I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed Jamie's presentation there. My brother-in-law, Chris, works across the NHS estate and the council estate in Bradford, encouraging people to cycle to work. So again, there's so much that can be done with that kind of support across the workforce. Now, you might have seen a recent survey up on LinkedIn that talked about the great gap between the number of people that we need within business, within organisations to drive sustainable change, and the number that actually have the skills. There's a huge gap, huge opportunities, but it was framed largely around the alphabet soup, the acronyms of TCFD, TNFD, CSRD, and even those that live and breathe this might struggle to keep up with what all those technical jobs are about. I want to stretch beyond those roles and talk about how we build transformative skills across the organisation as a whole. I worked for Marks & Spencer, a large organisation employing 80,000 people. There were 10 of us in the centre that did sustainability full time, another 10 dotted and integrated across the organisation in foods, clothing, property, marketing and comms, 20 in total. Our job was to get 80,000 colleagues to do sustainability as part of their day job. And I just want to share some brief observations and thoughts, 10 lessons I picked up from doing that. So if we can have the next slide, please. So the first thing I've learned is that when we talk about science, I love reading 200-page reports about the climate crisis, just lots coming out of New York Climate Week over the last few days, but most people don't. So it's really important that we can make the incredible pressure on the planetary boundaries that we have today accessible to everybody. And again, this is one slide I often use with people just to sort of help them understand that 3 degrees of heating in a world of potentially 9 billion people in the future is not the temperature difference between 9 o'clock this morning and 12 o'clock. Long-term averages that will have cataclysmic impacts on society and the economy that's meant to serve it. So again, here's just some thoughts about the previous ice age. You can see where many of you will probably be in northern Britain, under 1,000 meters of ice. It just took a global average temperatures of 5-6 degrees colder than today to leave 1,000 meters of ice above us. So what does 3 degrees of heating look like as well? Next slide. And again, I think in the last 12 months, I've begun to see a lot of mainstream people in business, but also citizens starting to say things are changing. Whether it's been wildfires, whether it's been floods, again, in the UK in the last few days. But that was just a sort of a pimple compared to what happened in Central Europe a couple of weeks ago, when some parts of Central Europe got 9 months of rain in 3 days. And even the best prepared countries, towns, cities, communities just can't cope with that. This is really beginning to bite. Next slide. But I don't want to sort of labour the point about the science. I want to talk about how we drive integration. And I've learned over 30 odd years of doing this, gathering a lot of grey hair, that actually it's about answering 3 fundamental questions in your business. The why, the what, the how. The why strategy. Why are you strategically doing this? The what is the engine room of change to ensure it's not greenwash. What are your targets? What are your numbers, your reports, your proof points? And the how is the thing that most people forget, and I'm going to really sort of hammer home today. How do you integrate it into your business, your value chain? So this is everybody's job, not just yours. Next slide, please. So let me start with the why. Go on to the next slide, please. And again, what we're starting to see, I certainly see in large businesses, when people get really interested, excited and engaged is when they see it as a transformative threat or opportunity to today's way of doing business. Again, many of you live within the mobility system. I don't need to sort of labour the point here. 10 years ago, a lot of car companies were told that the future was electric. They sort of nodded their head in public and then privately went back to the board and said, it ain't going to happen. Too difficult, too expensive. People will never go for charging an electric car. Now, the reality is 10 years on that we are seeing very substantial disruption of the incumbent car industries. We're starting to see, not as fast as we'd want, the rise of better public mobility systems, not always in the UK, but certainly in other countries. But anybody who sits in the boardroom of an incumbent car company today is scratching their head as to how they navigate a tremendously difficult transition. And the biggest point about all of this is that China had no export car industry to speak about 10 years ago. Today, it's the world's leading exporter of electric cars. It bet on the future in the way that Japan and Germany, that dominated the 20th century, failed to do. So this happens at a national level. It happens at a corporate level, an organizational level as well. When you talk about transformation, people pay attention. Next slide, please. And that's starting to happen in the food and drink system as we speak today. I mean, you might think, obviously, power and cars have a very significant greenhouse gas impact, but the food system has an even bigger one, not just in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, about a third of all emissions on the planet, but also in terms of water use, food waste. I mean, a criminal that nearly 40% of all calories produced on the planet never reach a human mouth. But also in terms of the loss of nature and the impact on smallholders and farmers who make no money in a food system that typically does, and they share none of the above. So we're starting to see a change, a transformation of the food system. It is not as clear and obvious as the shift of the mobility system, where I can say in a second, diesel to electric. And most people, men and women out on the street, will broadly understand what we're talking about. Talk about the change of the food system. I might talk about regenerative agriculture, techniques to reduce food waste, different heating systems, indoor farming, cultivated meat, alternative proteins, all of the above. And all of those technologies play a role, but not as much as people changing the food they decide to buy, whether it's hospitality, eat at home or eat out. It's all about dietary choices. But again, any food company, incumbent food company, whether a brand or a retailer that thinks the future is a little bit different from today, is in for a rude shock, because the food system is uniquely vulnerable to the problems it causes, uniquely vulnerable to those wild, weird weather events I'm talking about in terms of food availability, quality, and cost as well. So I'm not going to labour the point again, but I'm just making the point that every different industrial sector on the planet will go through this difficult, halting transformation driven by sustainability forces. So next slide. So let me just bring this home practically with my first lesson. This is what Marks and Spencer went through when it thought about sustainability, because initially it was just something that we had to do because all the other retailers, good people like Waitrose, Sainsbury's, the Coke were doing as well. So we better have a plan. And then we worked out that sustainability actually had a unique meaning for Marks and Spencer, as it does for every organisation. Everybody on this call has a slightly different story to tell. But you can see here that Marks and Spencer is defined by one word for 32 million customers, buying 3 billion items from it every year. That's quality. If it's perceived to sell quality, you can extract a small premium for that quality for clothing and food. If it's not seen to be selling quality, there's good alternatives, whether it's Amazon, Primark, Tesco's, or anybody else, Aldi, Lidl. Early 21st century, Marks and Spencer had lost its way on quality. Everybody's doing functional quality. Buttons are not falling off anybody's shirts. No one's packaging is leaking in supermarkets as a given. So Marks and Spencer recognised that it needed to reinvent the word quality for the new marketplace for the 21st century. And that was as much about emotional quality as functional quality. Functional quality was a given. Emotional quality, products that are produced in harmony with the planet by people that are well treated, wasn't a given. And Marks and Spencer was going to own this word going forward. That is the Marks and Spencer story. Beneath that, you can see some of the reasons why Marks and Spencer thought it could win. Its business model, particularly being 100% private label. Every product Marks and Spencer sells or sold at the time was its own product. It developed them, it had them manufactured, it sold them. It had the ability to do this better than most. Again, I hammer home, that is the Marks and Spencer story. It's not yours, but I want you to think strategically about your organisation and the word that defines it, and how sustainability takes that word forward into the new marketplace. Next slide, please. So just moving on to the what, this middle thing. I've been slightly sniffy about talking about CSRDs and TCFDs. I'm not dismissing it at all. This is where the rubber hits the road and you prove that you're actually reducing all those footprints I talked about. This prevents it from being greenwash. But I'm only going to tell you one story here. Next slide. We learned at M&S to measure, put as much effort into measuring the business case for sustainability as we did into measuring carbon, animal welfare, human rights, and everything else that was dear to my heart, and that brand of brothers and sisters, the 20 of us that were driving the agenda initially. And again, we learned to talk about this, the energy savings, the fuel savings, the plastic savings, even through to the sort of boring old coat hanger. M&S was giving out hundreds of millions of coat hangers for free every time it sold a garment at the time. That was a waste in terms of plastic and resources, a waste of money as well. By stopping doing that, encouraging people to give a hanger back, not take it away with them at the point of sale, Marks & Spencer made a donation to UNICEF that helped UNICEF do its work and save the business still millions as well. So again, good for sustainability, good for the business economically. You cut food waste, exactly the same. And it's not just pounds, shillings and pence, it's employee engagement, it's customer perception of your brand, it's resilience in your supply chains as well. But we measured it in micro detail, micro detail, and reported it and used it within the business in micro detail. Next slide, please. So let me turn to what I really want to sort of focus in on, 7 or 8 stories from how we integrated this across a big business. And again, to reiterate, Marks & Spencer is a small retailer on a global scale, turns over about 12 billion quid. It's selling 3 billion items to 32 million customers, producing 1,000 factories, 20,000 farms, and thousands of raw material sources, the cotton, the fish, the palm oil, the soy. Getting your arms around that big, busy organisation, going through a lot of existential commercial change, as well as facing the short-term challenges of things like the pandemic that turn up, it's hard. And here's what I've learned about how to do that practically. Next slide, please. So the first thing is, we didn't call it Marks & Spencer's 100-point sustainability plan that we launched. It was full of numbers, facts, figures, really important in terms of credibility with Greenpeace and The Guardian and other stakeholders. But we called it Plan A because there is no Plan B for the one planet we've got. And that cut through to 80,000 colleagues. So whether you were working on salt reduction in food or better factories in Bangladesh, working with hill farms in Scotland or in high streets back in Bradford, it was all part of Plan A. And you were part of that, you were leading that transformation. We had champions in every shop and every operating part of the business. And we listened to our colleagues who used to come back with all the wild and wacky things that the central office placed upon them that caused waste and problems and inefficiencies. And we responded and we cut those out. So Plan A was a transformation brand for the business as much as a stakeholder-facing sustainability plan. Next slide. The fourth thing we did was we made innovation real. We have to innovate on sustainability. I've just shown you 2 examples from the mobility sector, the food sector, that says we can't carry on as we are. We need radical shifts in how we do business. But those can be often very distant. Somebody in a white coat disappears for 5 years and then pops back into your life to say, I've got the answer. What we did was we brought innovation close to the business day to day. We took 5 shops, 5 factories, 20 farms, and we made those trial facilities for every possible environmental and social innovation. And we watched them in real time, whether they worked or not. And you can see the stats. A third were brilliant. We rolled it out across every factory, farm and shop. A third needed to stay there for a year or 2 to be tweaked and improved before we moved them out for rollout after a year or 2. And a third of them went straight in the bin because they looked good on paper, but they didn't work in practice. So again, it's really important to make innovation real and present in people's lives. Next slide. Perhaps the most important thing for a shopkeeper, and again, I appreciate that most of you are not shopkeepers, but you all have customers. And what we found typically, and this was at M&S, but also reviewing 200 papers from around the world of consumer insight and sustainability, 10% of people are deep green. That shapes all their consumption decisions, how they travel, how they eat, how their leisure, their approach to technology. Everything is grounded in sustainability. But it's been 10% for a decade, and it might grow to 15 to 20% as the world sort of burns around us. But I don't think it's going to become 70, 80, 90% of the time that we need. 35% of people like green. Typically middle class, want good holidays, good food, good clothing, good cars. But if that thing is also fundamentally has sustainability locked into it, remember my story at M&S, quality goods with sustainability as a reinforcer as part of that, they buy into it. Locality focus, critically important. We often forget this. 35% of people tremendously worried about the future. Born in Bradford, live in Bradford, die in Bradford. What's anybody doing for Bradford? Talking about the Arctic, the Amazon, talking about 2040, 2050 net zero is irrelevant to them. Clean air, clean water, good jobs for their kids, better health outcomes for them and their family. Now, that's what matters. So we need the big picture, but we also need a small picture for many people. And the 20% of people sadly not engaged at all. Despite what you might think from X/Twitter, it's not about gobby climate deniers. It's mainly driven by poverty. People have got other priorities in their lives, and we need to respect that. But you really need to understand your customer. Lesson 6, please. And of course, that takes you on to the beware of greenwash. And again, I see lots of businesses, some of them mendaciously, sort of really trying to sort of, do things in a bad way and cover it up. But many people just confused step into this world of greenwash. And this is a report from Planet Tracker that talks about not just greenwashing through the lens of product claims, over-claiming for the product you put on the marketplace, but these other aspects. Again, I won't go through them now. You can look up the report, you can easily find it. But it's really risky, both at any organizational level, to making claims that you can't substantiate and back up as well. Lesson 7. So then I've got to finish off with this bit about the customer, the consumer. And it's really important to keep things simple. And again, this is my story from retail. It's not yours, but I just want to make a key point here. Marks & Spencer is small. It sells about 45 to 50,000 unique types of products. 3 billion items, but about 50,000 types of products. Tesco's 200,000, Amazon, tens of millions of unique products. If all you do is put a carbon label on every product and say over to you, customer, make some decisions now, nothing's going to change, is it? It's just too complex, too confusing. So what we're starting to see is businesses just say simplification. Tesco's and Zalando have turned around to all their suppliers into their shops and said, you will cut your carbon by 30%, 50%, ultimately 70 or 80%. Otherwise, you're not on my shelf. All you need to know as a Tesco's customer is you're lifting stuff off the shelf. It's on a journey to be much better. Everything, not a few things. Marks & Spencer made all its coffee and tea fair trade, all its eggs free range before everybody else. Again, you didn't need to look at the small print. Every egg in that food hall is free range as well. And again, we're starting to see some emerging interesting tools around artificial intelligence that'll help you make whole basket choices. I'm not going into it now in the interest of time, but you'll be able to put something in on Tesco's.com, Sainsbury's.com, or Cardo that said, I want a medium level carbon basket, 80 products in it, help me design it. What are the 2 or 3 products that are causing a problem that I need to take out, and how do I replace them? A story for another day, but keep it simple. Number 8, please. Now, I see lots of businesses have a really good sustainability program over here, and I see a really good charity program on the other side of the business, and the two things are not joined up. And I think that's really dangerous. I think I've just told you that for a lot of people, a lot of consumers, citizens, colleagues, the social aspect of what you do, the local aspect of what you do is just as important. So what we did at Marks & Spencer is very strategically work with charities that had relevance to the business. And you can see here the facts and figures. Marks & Spencer is the number 1 retailer of lingerie in the UK, the core M&S colleague and customer, woman 40 plus, number 1 premature killer with breast cancer. So for 20 years, Marks & Spencer worked strategically and consistently to raise tens of millions of pounds to address breast cancer. It's a really obvious thing to do. And I want to see you drive together what you do on charity over here and social, what you do in net zero environmental together, 2 sides, same coin. Lesson 9, please. So penultimate point, and the same one again, this is hammering home for the 35% who are locality driven. Again, I appreciate you're different from Marks & Spencer that's got a shop in hundreds of different communities. Making each of those shops useful to those communities, even for people who don't shop with it, is critically important. But it's supporting food banks, going out and sort of painting and working with schools, beach cleans, whatever it may be, taking on people who are facing real barriers to work in those communities, and job can be transformational. So again, I might be talking about net zero, I might be at New York Climate Week, I might be at Davos at the World Economic Forum talking about net zero. The next day, I'm in the local community, working with that community to drive the change that it needs as well. And the final one, please. And this is really important because for most businesses like retailer, maybe a lot of yours as well, the true impact of your business is in what is called scope 3, your supply chain. And I talked about thousands of M&S suppliers working in factories, dye houses, farms, cotton fields, soy plantations. That's where the problems occur by and large. So you have to take those suppliers on the journey to help them reduce their emissions as well. It's not enough to send them an email saying, you've got to go green, over to you. You have to support them. So what I'm increasingly seeing now is big businesses starting to create hubs to engage and support their suppliers on the journey towards more sustainable outcomes. And again, just to sort of reiterate here, typically to deliver a more sustainable business model, you have to lose 90% of today's carbon footprint across that value chain within the next 15 to 20 years. That is a radical change to how you do things today. Business model, products and services, value chain as well. What happened by accident? The businesses that are around and winning in the future, the ones that support their suppliers on that journey. Next slide, please. So again, we've talked 10 key lessons there that I've picked up over all those years at M&S and with many other businesses as well. And I come back to where I started, the why, the what, the how. Most businesses I work with, typically will run towards that middle column, the what. What do I need to do, Mike? What report, what baseline, what target should I set? What governance should I have? Critically important. I can't stress that enough. But it will not work unless you have that strategic why. Again, for Marks and Spencer, reinventing quality for the 21st century. Yours will be different. Unless you have that why, the business will not galvanize and organize around everything that you ask it to do. And you're going to ask a lot of it to become sustainable. And critically, this how. How do you get, for me, 80,000 colleagues, tens of thousands of suppliers, 32 million customers, aligned behind this? Not on my terms, my language, living and breathing it, having degrees in it. It's about meeting people where they're at and helping them engage. So that's the story. And I want you to walk away from here challenging yourselves to prepare for transformation by integrating this into all that you do. Emotional intelligence is at least as important as the IQ you'll bring to it. Graham, back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. That was great. I think we're now into, as it says, about 10 minutes of Q&A. I want to keep it rapid. Lots of questions. So as and when they start coming through, we'll do that. But I mean, for me, just picking on a couple of things. I mean, lesson one, the why. I'm interested, how much of a job was that within the organization to actually define that? Stakeholder process that you might have had to go through to kind of deliver all of that? Interested just a bit more on that, perhaps.
Yeah, Graham, quickly, because I see some questions coming in. So it was a 3-year journey. This started out until the day before we launched this 100-point technical plan that was very well received by the world of sustainable business. It was called Marks and Spencer's 100-point sustainability plan. Our head of internal comms, a guy called Robert Nuttall, said that's boring as hell. He invented Plan A, the brand that sat above the technical what that I'd done. I couldn't have achieved everything I did without him. But the quality point took 3 years to convince the business that this was more than just a technical plan to make sure that we didn't get told off by Greenpeace and The Guardian, but actually it was something that was incredibly valuable in terms of the reinvention of Marks and Spencer that lost its way. And by latching onto this quality word, we found a way to make it relevant to 80,000 colleagues who thought quality every day and 32 million customers that shop with Marks and Spencer looking for quality as well. So 3-year journey. I hope it's quicker for you.
Well, I think that lines up with the first question we got there, Mike. Any suggestions to get board buy-in to sustainability initiatives? Perhaps 3 years. So, how do we fast track that process?
And again, my number one piece of learning is that one slide with the why, the what, the how on it, because most of us walk into a boardroom waving this sort of report saying the world's burning, we've got to cut our carbon by 90%, we need to do these 32 things in the next 3 years, it's going to cost us £6 million. And the board just look at you and think, you're mad. We've got a difficult marketplace out there, costs are going up, we've got all these challenges in the marketplace, we haven't got time to be doing this. So you have to say, look, I'm going to sit down with you. I'm going to talk about the why we need to act, what we need to do, and how we're going to make sure we do it effectively and efficiently. So number one tip, get the 3 things answered together rather than sequentially. And the second thing, I made the point when the only thing I talked about under the what, business case. And again, it seems very sort of trite to say, it seems bloody obvious. It's not that we measured the business case, lots of people try to do it. It is that we did it in such granular detail and put so much effort into capturing every pound that went into doing 100 things and every pound or other measure of value that came out of it. And the final point there, lots of things that Marks and Spencer did on that plan cost the business money, better woods, better fish, better cotton, we had to invest. But we saved so much money from being less wasteful in terms of energy, fuel, plastic, food waste. I gave a lot of that money back to the chief financial officer, extra profit and reinvestment money, but I was allowed to keep some of it to pay for the better wood, cotton and fish. So we're able to sort of move money around the business because we had a grip on the business case.
Okay, fabulous. So that's that side of it. The stakeholders being suppliers as well. So there's a question here about how open was M&S to suggestions from its suppliers in that whole process. I mean, you were mentioning sort of saying, right, now it's got to be this type of product, but yeah, hearing from suppliers.
Yeah, and again, it's a brilliant question, because generally across the global marketplace, when it comes to big brands and big retailers and how they treat their supply chains, it ain't great. It's very parent-child. You'll do, and while you do it, you'll cut your costs. I mean, it's not very motivating. Initially, before Plan A was launched, Marks and Spencer probably did the same as everybody else. We're going to come and audit you once a year to make sure there's no kids in the factories. If you've got kids in your factories, you're going to get sacked and moved on. But it was all peripheral. It didn't feel important to the suppliers, and they just felt told at. And again, go back to this point about 5 factories that were demonstration factories that proved the point. A lot of them were quite skeptical as to whether they should invest into this. They would go and visit a factory. One of the great leaps forward we had with a chicken supplier that was really sort of resistant to it. He went to visit an eco factory run by a clothing supplier. Nobody from Marks and Spencer was there. They just talked boss to boss about being a supplier, the benefits it was bringing. That chicken supplier came back and was transformed because they'd had that conversation. There's lots of we had something called a Plan A supplier exchange, which brought people together for events like this to share best practices. And the final story was we had a bronze, silver, gold ladder to every food supplier was on. And as you went from bronze to silver, you cut your energy use by 20%. Bravo, I'm happy. But you cut your operating costs as well. Every time you went from bronze to silver, you'd invest in your people, you had less absenteeism, better quality product production from them. The business gained, I gained. So again, always making sure that those double wins out there. And to your point, always listening to the suppliers, because just like people running the shops, they know the daft things at the office, set people in the middle, ask them to do.
Fantastic. Next one's around sustainable travel plans. I think this is, you referenced Scope 3 in lesson 10. This is coming into this piece. Are there sustainable travel plans in place?
So remember, I left M&S 5 years ago. When I joined M&S was a very high street driven business. I mean, it was 95% of its shops were on the high street. Public transport links were pretty good for people that wanted to get to work. M&S is a bit more edge of town now, because that's just where the marketplace has gone. If it hadn't, it'd be out of business. And therefore, it's had to think a little bit more about how it builds travel plans, cycle to work, links in with the public travel system on the edge of town a bit more. Could it do more? I'm sure if you talk to my successors there, they would say yes. But they're juggling lots of different things they've got to deliver as well.
Sure. The one there is, what was the most impactful sustainability initiative in terms of both environmental benefit and business performance in your time there? What would you...
Energy use. I mean, if you were just looking at the immediacy of reducing the footprint of Marks and Spencer's store estate, those hundreds of shops, offices, warehouses, and putting tens of millions of quid back into the CFO's pocket to deploy as they saw fit, that was it. Now, again, most of that sort of £750 million we saved net over 10 years, some of it came from a small number of blockbuster innovations, but most of it came from lots of small things consistently done across hundreds of shops, thousands of factories, that because we could keep a granular eye on what was being saved, we could ladder it up. So I would impress upon you, there's rarely one blockbuster saving, but there are lots of things that add up when you change 2% here, 3% there, but it's replicated across many different activities.
Yes. Something around food and perhaps including a RAG status around carbon impact. I mean, all of this stuff is about educating people and giving people that information to make better decisions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I've already made the point that I don't think a carbon label on every single product in a shop is the answer. Let me just qualify that. A significant number of people who put food in their basket in a shop don't remember the price of the product they're buying. That's the number one issue for them in terms of making a purchasing decision, and they don't remember the price. Probably 10% registered the red, amber, green in terms of salts, fats, and sugars they put in their own body or that of their family. So asking them to understand this esoteric thing called carbon and act on it is really hard. But remember what I said, every product does need a detailed carbon footprint, sustainability footprint associated with each individual unique item. But how I use it won't be in terms of a label. It will be this basket level solution, AI driven, that's using that AI insight across thousands of different products to say, you want 80 products for 4 people in your house, this kind of diet. This is our recommendation of the best basket that you can buy. Here are the 3 products that we've taken away that might unsettle you. Here are the options that you might have to sort of supplement or replace them as well. So yes to having that data for every product. Not sure labeling's the right answer.
Interesting. I like the use of technology there. Can you share an example where you faced significant internal pushback and how you resolved it?
Yeah, and that was often around raw materials, because on the surface, better palm oil, better soy, better cotton, better wood, better fish, massively impactful, but also a massive part of your cost base. Mm-hmm. So there's always a nervousness here about being out of step with the rest of the marketplace. So we came up with ultimately a simple solution. We said of the 100 things we're doing, 30% of them, M&S wanted to be the marketplace leader, not just in the UK, but globally, in terms of bringing solutions through to the marketplace. 70% of things, refrigeration kit, £1 billion worth of refrigeration kit in stores. If you try to green that and it's got a significant footprint overnight on your own, you go bust. Just too difficult. If you work with Tesco's and Sainsbury's on fridges, on palm oil, on soy, you can start to move the whole sector forwards on things that no one wants to have a point of difference on, but you can't solve on your own. So what's the 30% of things where you want a point of difference? It's relevant to your marketplace. What's the 70% where you move together with the marketplace? And it's not enough to say that in theory. You have to create these partnerships and actively participate them in to drive the change you need.
That's really, really sensible, isn't it? Collaboration, reduce the cost and the effort as a consequence of collaborating.
Just quickly on this, because I believe fundamentally the world will burn unless we all collaborate across the marketplace, which was why I would see more policy and regulation just driving the whole marketplace up, not just relying on 1 or 2 leaders. I want to leave space for innovation as well. I want Marks and Spencer to be spurred on by trying to win in the marketplace by being greener, because that drags everybody after it to this point about transformation and doing things differently as well. So finding that balance in your business model is really important.
Fantastic.